You liked it last time, Victor whispered, his fingers grazing my neck. Yeah, before I knew you were collecting my blood like a fine wine. 2 weeks ago, I met a guy on TINDER, Viktor. His profile was impossible to ignore. He had this dark, almost black hair, styled half up, half down in a way that made him look effortlessly cool, like a musician or an actor in some underground film. His most striking feature wasn't even his hair, though, it was his tattoos. A spider web stretched behind his ear, trailing down into a hyper-realistic spider sinking its fangs into his neck. He had other tattoos, abstract, chaotic, like someone had just inked random strokes on his skin for the sake of it. But that spider? That one stood out. It looked almost alive. His eyes were another thing entirely. He wore red contacts, or at least I thought he did. They weren't the usual bright, artificial kind that made people look like a horror movie extra. His had depth, a strange mix of red and brown that, in the right lighting, resembled honey swirling in the sun. He had these soft, full lips, slightly parted with a lollipop stick sticking out. His selfie was taken in the mirror of a public bathroom, but something about it didn't seem trashy or desperate for attention. He just looked different. I was about to swipe right when I hesitated. I always check bios before swiping. That's where the real red flags show up. His was simple. I hope you like vampires because I'm a neckbiter who doesn't mind the taste of blood. I won't lie, my friends would call this a walking red flag. But me? I have a thing for vampires. Always have. The whole blood play thing, the mystery, the danger, it turns me on. And Viktor. He seemed tailor-made for me. So of course I swiped right. He matched me within minutes. We started talking, and I was immediately hooked. He was charming, but not in an over-the-top way. He had this casual confidence, like he knew I'd find him interesting. And I did. He was into everything I was into, down to the same kinks and boundaries. It was like the universe dropped this perfect, bloodthirsty stranger into my lap. After a few days of messaging, he brought up hooking up. Normally, I don't rush into things, but he suggested something different, meeting up first to see if we clicked in person before jumping into anything. He wanted to take things slow, understand each other first. It was thoughtful. Not the kind of thing I expected from a guy with a vampire kink. So we made plans to meet. He picked Arby's. Not some dimly lit bar, not a fancy restaurant, Arby's. It was kind of hilarious. But honestly, that night was perfect. We talked over sandwiches and curly fries like we'd known each other forever. He had this deep, smooth voice that made everything he said sound interesting. The way he spoke made me feel like I was the only person in the world that mattered at that moment. Every time he looked at me, his eyes seemed to darken just a little, like he was drinking me in. By the time we finished eating, I was all in. The second I got home though, things started getting weird. It started with my dog, Riley. He's a beagle, sweet, affectionate, and well-trained. He never barks at night. But that night, the second I tried to sleep, he went insane, barking, growling, whining. I got up, turned on the light, and walked over to my window, where he was staring and shaking. Nothing was there. I looked outside. The yard was empty. The street was quiet, just the wind pushing against the trees. I figured maybe the shadows freaked him out. Maybe he saw a raccoon, or a stray cat. So I put him in his crate downstairs, hoping he'd calm down. I could still hear his muffled barking for a while, but eventually, it stopped. I fell asleep. In the morning I went to open my blinds and froze. There was a handprint on my window. Not just any handprint, one made in blood. The fingers looked smeared, like whoever left it had been pressing against the glass for a while. The blood was thickest on the middle and index fingers, dried into dark, cracked streaks. My stomach flipped. I grabbed my jacket and ran outside, expecting to see something, anything, that could explain it. But when I got to the window, the print was gone. The glass was clean. I stood there, barefoot in the cold, trying to make sense of it. Had I imagined it? Had my half-asleep brain conjured up some horror movie image that didn't really exist? I went back inside, feeling ridiculous. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe my brain was playing tricks on me. I tried to push it out of my mind, and then I saw Viktor again. We met up a few days later. We were sitting in his car, talking, when he asked me about my job. Nothing weird about that, right? Except he already knew about my current project. How'd that new ad you're designing turn out? I blinked. I work at a small bank as a graphic designer. I make advertisements, signs, promotional content. I'd been working on an ad all week, but I was positive I had never told him about it. I hesitated before answering. Maybe I had mentioned it in passing. Maybe he saw something on my social media. I let it go. That night, though, Riley acted up again. I let him outside to pee before bed, but when I called him back in, he wouldn't come. I stepped outside, shivering in the cold, and found him standing completely still, staring at the fence that separated my yard from my neighbor's. His ears were pinned back, his body was tense. I followed his gaze. A figure stood on the other side, tall, motionless. A hood covered his head, and I couldn't make out his face. The only thing I could see were his hands, hanging at his sides. His fingernails were red. I didn't wait to find out if it was blood or paint. I screamed. Riley bolted inside. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and grabbed my phone to call the police. By the time they arrived, the figure was gone. There were no footprints, no signs of forced entry. The officers said it was probably a dumb prank, a neighborhood kid messing around. I almost let myself believe that, until I heard the scream. It came from next door. My neighbor's wife. I rushed over just in time to see her cradling something in her arms, sobbing. A cat. Her cat. Its fur was matted with blood, its body stabbed 7 times. That's when I knew. This wasn't some prank. Someone was watching me, and I had a feeling it wasn't just anyone. It was him. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bloodied cat, my neighbors sobbing over its lifeless body. I saw the hooded figure at my fence. I heard Riley's growls echoing in my head. My stomach twisted every time I replayed it all. Someone was out there. Someone wanted me afraid, and it was working. I curled up on the couch with Riley, petting him absent-mindedly. His body was tense, ears twitching at every little noise. He was still on edge. That told me everything I needed to know. This was real. Something was wrong. And the worst part, I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? The cops didn't care. My neighbors were just as freaked out as I was, but had no proof of anything. If I started telling my friends that a bloody handprint appeared on my window and vanished, that a figure with red-stained nails was stalking me, they'd think I was losing it. So I told no one. Well, no one except Viktor. The next day I messaged him, telling him about the strange things happening around my house. He was weirdly calm about it. Almost too calm. "People are crazy," he texted back. "You should be careful. If you ever feel unsafe, you can always crash at my place. I'd protect you." I hesitated before replying. Would I feel safer there? I barely knew Viktor, but what were my options? Stay home and wait for the psycho outside to finally break in. I'll keep that in mind. I sent back. I didn't make any commitments, but a small part of me was comforted. At least someone believed me. The next few days were quiet. No figures outside. No weird noises. I almost convinced myself it was over. But then while I was at work, my phone buzzed. A text from my neighbor. "Someone tried to break into your house." I felt like my stomach dropped out of my body. I immediately called her, my hands shaking as I held the phone to my ear. She answered on the first ring. She told me she was watching TV when she heard footsteps outside. At first she ignored it. Could have been the mailman. Could have been a kid running down the sidewalk. But then she heard something clink against my doorknob, like someone was trying to get inside. She peeked through the blinds and saw him. The hooded man. He was hunched over my door, hands gripping the handle. She screamed. He turned to look at her, and that's when she saw his face, or rather, what was left of it. His skin was blistered, peeling in patches like he'd suffered severe burns. His lips were cracked, his teeth stained an unnatural pink, and his nails, oh God, his nails, red, stained, coated in something dark. She froze in horror, and then he smiled at her, a twisted too wide grin. She screamed again, and that's when another neighbor, an old man who lived across the street, heard her and called the police. By the time the cops arrived, he was gone. Nothing left behind except a burnt patch of grass near my driveway, a cigarette, still smoldering. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. This was real. Someone was after me, and he wasn't giving up. That night I packed a bag. I refused to sleep in that house. I called my best friend and asked if I could crash at her place. She didn't even hesitate. I grabbed Riley, my essentials, and left. For a couple of days, everything felt normal again. I stayed at my friend's apartment, went to work, tried to push it all out of my mind. Maybe it was over. Maybe the cops scared him away. But the morning I was supposed to go back home, I noticed something strange. A car was following me. I first saw it when I left my friend's apartment complex. A beat-up old sedan, gray, with tinted windows. It was a few cars behind me. I didn't think much of it at first. But then it turned everywhere I did, onto the main road, onto the highway, onto the street leading to my job. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, my heart was racing. The car didn't stop. It slowed down as it passed me, like the driver was watching me. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it drove off. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I felt like I was going to throw up. This was getting worse. I called Viktor that night, told him everything. The break-in attempt, the neighbor's description, the car. He didn't even hesitate. "Come stay with me," he said. "I have an extra room. I have a gun. I won't let anything happen to you." I wanted to say no. I wanted to be strong, handle this on my own, but I couldn't. I was terrified. So I said yes. That night I packed my bags again and drove to Viktor's place. His house was nothing like I expected. It wasn't some dark, creepy vampire lair. It was nice, modern, but with a gothic twist. Black furniture, dark red curtains, dim lighting. It should have felt eerie, but it didn't. It felt homey. Riley, however, was uneasy. His ears were pinned back the second we walked in. He sniffed the air, then let out a low whine. Viktor reached out to pet him, but Riley flinched away. "He's just stressed," I said quickly, trying to brush it off. "He's been through a lot." Viktor nodded, but something flickered in his expression, something I couldn't place. I ignored it. That first night nothing happened. We had dinner, talked for hours, and for the first time in days, I felt safe, and then we hooked up, and it was incredible. I don't even know how to explain it. He knew what he was doing. He was intense, passionate, overwhelming in the best way possible. By the time we were done, I felt exhausted, drained, like I could sleep for days. He tucked me into bed, kissed my forehead, and promised to wake me in the morning when breakfast was ready. I fell asleep instantly, and then, at 3 a.m., I heard it. A scream, not a human scream, a dog. Riley. My heart stopped. I shot up, scrambling out of bed and running downstairs, and that's when I saw him. A figure, hunched over Riley, a knife in his pocket, fingers, red, stained, the smell of iron thick in the air. The man slowly turned to look at me, and I screamed, because it wasn't a stranger, it wasn't the hooded figure, it was Viktor, and he had been drinking Riley's blood. I stood there, frozen, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Viktor, my Viktor, was crouched over Riley, his fingers drenched in blood. His mouth, oh God, his mouth, it glistened. A sickening mix of red and saliva coated his lips, his tongue flicking out to taste what remained. Riley whimpered, his small body twitching on the floor. My stomach dropped. I opened my mouth to scream again, but no sound came out. Viktor stared at me, his red eyes, no longer just contacts, no longer just a fun, sexy aesthetic, glowing in the dim light. He wasn't shocked, he wasn't scrambling for an excuse. He looked annoyed, like I had caught him doing something inconvenient, like I was interrupting him. "Viktor," I whispered, barely able to breathe, "what the fuck are you doing?" He stood slowly, wiping the back of his hand across his mouth, smearing the blood further. The movement was eerily calm, his gaze flicked to the knife still tucked into his pocket, then back to me. I ran. I turned so fast I almost slipped on the blood-streaked floor, but I caught myself, sprinting back upstairs. I heard him behind me. His footsteps were slow, controlled, like he knew I had nowhere to go. But I wasn't going to die in this house. I dove into his bedroom, locking the door behind me, and shoving the dresser in front of it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely move, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I had to think, I had to get out. Then my eyes landed on something. A blood stain on the carpet, a deep, dark red mark, hidden beneath one of his chairs. My stomach lurched, but I forced myself to keep looking. There was something else. A closet door, slightly ajar. I stepped toward it, my pulse pounding in my ears. I don't know what I expected to find, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. I reached for the handle and yanked it open. Vials, 5 of them, small glass containers, filled with a thick, dark liquid. I didn't have to guess what it was. It was blood. I grabbed one, my fingers trembling as I turned it in my hands. There was a label on it, one word, written in neat, precise handwriting. My name. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. He had been collecting my blood, storing it, drinking it. The sound of splintering wood snapped me back to reality. Viktor was breaking through the door. I shoved the closet shut and backed away, my mind racing. Windows. I needed a way out. The window. I ran to it, throwing it open just as the dresser behind me slid an inch forward. He was getting in. I didn't think. I grabbed my bag, tossed it out first, then climbed onto the ledge. The dresser slammed forward another inch. "You don't have to do this," Viktor said from the other side, his voice eerily soft. The lock snapped. I jumped. I don't even remember the fall. I just remember the pain. A sharp, twisting agony shot up my leg as I hit the ground. My ankle. Something was wrong with my ankle. I couldn't stop. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the blinding pain, and grabbed my bag. Viktor's front door slammed open. I didn't look back. I ran. I drove straight to the ER, my hands so slick with sweat, I could barely grip the wheel. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see Viktor's car tailing me, but the roads were empty. At the hospital, I didn't hold back. I told them everything. The blood, the vials, Riley, the way he looked at me like I was food. They ran tests, checked me for infections, diseases, anything. I sat in that cold, sterile hospital room for hours, my mind spiraling, and then the police showed up. 2 officers, both looking bored as hell, taking notes like I was telling them about a stolen bike, instead of a man who tried to drink my blood. "Ma'am," one of them said, flipping his notepad closed, "we checked the address you gave us." I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding. "There's no one living there." I blinked. "What?" "The house is abandoned," he said flatly. "Has been for at least 5 years. No record of a Viktor insert last name. No utilities. No residence. Nothing." I stared at him. "That's not possible. I'm just telling you what we found," he said, slipping his pen back into his pocket. I wanted to scream. He was real. I had been there. He wasn't just some hallucination, some fever dream. I showed them my phone, scrolling through my messages. They were gone. Every single text from Viktor had vanished. His Tinder profile, deleted. The only proof I had that he ever existed was his picture, his neck, his chest, that spider tattoo. Nothing else. They didn't believe me. Not really. They told me to be careful, and to call them if I saw anything suspicious, and then they left. Like it was just another case of a crazy girl making up stories. I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream at them. But what good would it do? Viktor was gone. He had erased himself, and now I was left with nothing except my fear, and my new reality. I quit my job. I dyed my hair. I moved. I drained my savings hopping between motels, never staying in one place too long. I had nothing left. No Riley. No sense of security. No future that didn't involve constantly looking over my shoulder. But I know he's out there, waiting, watching. I don't sleep anymore. Not really. I nap in short bursts, always waking up in a panic, heart hammering in my chest. Every time I walk outside, I scan the faces around me. Every time I enter a room, I check for exits, because one day he'll find me again. I know he will, and next time, I don't think I'll get away. I wake up in cold sweats almost every night now. It's always the same. A dream, no. A memory of that night in Viktor's house, the way he looked at me. The sound of the knife sliding out of his pocket, the way his lips curled into a twisted smile as he reached for me. And Riley? God, I can still hear the whimper he made. That final sound before Viktor sank his teeth into him. Some nights I wake up convinced I can still smell the blood. I haven't stopped running. It's been weeks since I left town. I've been bouncing between motels, staying just long enough to rest before moving on. My bank account is screaming, but I don't care. The second I feel eyes on me, the second I hear a noise outside my door that doesn't feel right, I'm gone. I drive through the night. I don't stop at gas stations unless there are people around. I don't use the same credit card more than once in the same area, because I know he's looking for me, and I know he'll find me. It's only a matter of time. A week ago I checked into a shitty little roadside motel in Arizona. I paid in cash, signed a fake name, and carried my entire life in a single duffel bag. The room was disgusting. The carpet smelled like mildew. The walls were stained with something dark, and the flickering light above the bed cast everything in a sickly yellow glow. But it was cheap, and it was far away from where everything happened. I thought I was safe. I was wrong. That night as I was brushing my teeth, I heard something. A soft tap on my window. Not a knock. Not something casual. Just the lightest sound. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone was letting me know they were there. My stomach dropped. I turned off the water, heart hammering, and stood perfectly still. Tap, tap, tap. I told myself it was the wind. It wasn't the wind. I grabbed my phone and stepped toward the window, my fingers shaking as I slowly pulled the curtain aside, and my blood went cold. There was a handprint on the glass. A bloody handprint. It wasn't there before. I swear to God it wasn't there before. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Then I heard it. A voice. Low. Smooth. Familiar. Found you. I ran. I didn't even stop to grab my things. I just grabbed my keys and bolted out the door barefoot, my pulse pounding so hard it hurt. I didn't look back. I jumped into my car, started the engine, and peeled out of that parking lot so fast my tires screeched against the pavement. As I sped down the dark, empty highway, I forced myself to look in the rearview mirror, and I wish I hadn't. Because standing in the glow of the motel sign, perfectly still, was him, Viktor. His hood was down. His face, it was worse than before. The burns had spread, his skin cracked and peeling, exposing raw red flesh beneath. His lips had split open from his unnatural smile, and his teeth, pink, glistening sharp, were fully exposed. He raised a hand, not to wave, to lick the blood off his fingers. I nearly swerved off the road. By the time I steadied the car and looked back, he was gone. Just gone. Like he was never there. I don't know what I'm dealing with anymore. A stalker? A psychopath? Something worse. He should be dead. No one should be able to survive the things he's gone through. The burns. The disappearing act. The way he seems to be everywhere I go. And the worst part? The more I run, the stronger he seems to get. Like he's feeding off my fear. Like the more terrified I am, the more powerful he becomes. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. I just know I can't stop moving. Because the second I do, he's going to catch me. And this time I won't get away. I haven't stopped driving since that night at the motel. The highway stretches endlessly before me, dark and empty. The yellow lines blurring together as exhaustion claws at my mind. My fingers grip the steering wheel so tightly they ache, but I can't relax. I can't stop. I know he's out there. Somewhere. I've been running for weeks, but no matter where I go, he finds me. I don't know how. I don't use my real name. I pay in cash. I never stay in one place longer than a few nights. I take back roads, avoid highways, never settle into a routine, but he still finds me. I see him in glimpses. A figure in a passing car. A hooded silhouette standing too still at the edge of a gas station parking lot. A shadow lingering outside my motel room, just out of reach of the security cameras. Always watching. Always waiting. I don't know what he wants. No, I do. He wants me. Not in a way a stalker wants his victim. Not even in a way that makes sense. He doesn't want to kill me. He wants to consume me. I feel it in my bones. In the way my skin prickles when I sense him near. In the way my blood runs cold when I hear that low, smooth voice whisper my name from the darkness. The fear is making me sick. I barely eat. I barely sleep. I can't sleep, because when I do, I wake up to things that weren't there before. A bloody handprint on my motel mirror. A note left on my bedside table in handwriting that is too neat, too precise. You taste better when you're scared. I wake up in a panic, drenched in sweat, hands shaking as I throw my things into a bag and flee. Again and again and again. It doesn't matter. He follows. I don't know how much longer I can do this. My body is breaking down. My mind feels like it's splitting apart, unraveling thread by thread, and I'm starting to wonder if that's what he wants. If he's waiting for me to give up, to let him take me. Tonight I stopped at a rest area in the middle of nowhere, just long enough to use the bathroom, splash some cold water on my face, and breathe. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead, flickering every few seconds, casting the dingy tiled walls in an unsettling strobe effect. I grip the sink, staring at my reflection. I barely recognize myself. My cheeks are hollow, my eyes sunken and surrounded by dark circles. My lips are dry, cracked. My skin is pale. I look sick. I feel sick. Something is wrong with me. I can feel it. Like something is spreading through my veins, poisoning me from the inside out. I turn on the faucet, cupping cold water in my hands, and splashing it over my face. It helps, but only for a moment. Then the lights flicker. The room darkens for less than a second. But when the light returns, there's a figure behind me, standing in the doorway, a tall hooded shape, still and silent. My breath catches in my throat. I can't move. I can't think. The mirror distorts, the edges warping, twisting the reflection into something wrong. His hood slips back just enough for me to see his mouth. Smiling. Too wide. Teeth too pink. I spin around, and there's no one there. The bathroom is empty. My pulse thunders in my ears as I stumble backward, my shoulders slamming into the wall. My knees feel weak. My stomach twists. I grip the edge of the sink to steady myself, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Then I see it. In the mirror. A message, written in smeared fresh blood across the glass. "You're getting weaker." I run, bursting through the bathroom door, sprinting to my car, locking it the second I'm inside. My hands are shaking so badly, I can barely get the keys into the ignition. The engine roars to life, and I peel out of the parking lot, tires screeching against the asphalt. The highway stretches before me, empty and endless, and I drive like the devil himself is on my heels, because he is. And I don't know how much longer I can keep running. I don't know how much longer I can fight him. I can feel myself slipping, like he's inside me now. Like every time I get away, I leave a piece of myself behind, and one day there won't be anything left. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what I'm going to do. I just know I can't let him win. I can't let him take me, because if he does, I don't think I'll ever escape.